Well, this is going to be another contrarian review, I suppose. On this episode of Rotten Reviews, I'm going to take a look at 2016's X-Men Apocalypse. It has a 47% on the tomato meter and a 65% on the audience score. Well, it has 127,000 plus audience reviews, and well, Rotten Tomatoes claims that it's not rotten. The score says it's not, but I'm going to have to say that it is. It's got far too many flaws. It's far too disappointing as an X-Men film. And you know, a lot of people to this day in 2019 going into 2020, the fans of the X-Men franchise, they're still arguing amongst themselves on which particular X-Men film is the worst. There's a camp that is arguing between this one, X-Men Apocalypse, and the one that came after, simply titled Dark Phoenix. As you can see, even Dark Phoenix, while the critics say it's rotten, it also has a 64% on the audience score. So comparing that to Apocalypse, almost identical on the audience score, and I believe, well, look at Dark Phoenix. It only has 15,000 something audience reviews, whereas Apocalypse has 127,000. So that's telling me that this one is probably a little bit better than Dark Phoenix, and you'll also notice that Dark Phoenix doesn't have the X-Men title in front of it, and I wonder why that is. Actually, I'm wondering why that is. Somebody else is going to answer, I'm sure. But in any case, X-Men Apocalypse, it's probably next to being the worst X-Men film. I'm going to argue that it deserves to be rotten, largely because of all its logical plot fails and things that it does with the characters that are irredeemable, that you don't just come back from that and continue on with these characters as being the good guys, and we'll get into that. But let's jump right into the actual audience reviews. We have one from 12 hours ago, meaning December 28th, 12 hours ago. 2.5 stars, too epic for me, but it also contains some good scenes. Wow, too epic. I think they mean that it has a lot of over-the-top CGI, drawn out battle going on at the end, and it does. That's not exactly what I would call epic. That's what I call boring, and that's probably what they're trying to say. They give it 2.5 stars. I'm going to say 2 stars max. I mean, peaking at 2 stars. I want to say almost 1.5, but I'm going to kind of give it 2, just barely give it 2. Again, it's just got too many flaws. I should list who's in this because they're partly responsible. You know, James McAvoy as Javier, as Dr. X. He's passable. He's passable in this. It's not his best performance, but he's not rotten in his role. He did a passable job. Michael Fassbender, he did a passable job, but nothing out of the ordinary. Jennifer Lawrence, now that's debatable whether that's even passable or not. I think Jennifer Lawrence is on the edge of being rotten on her performance on this, just on the edge. It's a tough call for me. I'm saying that she's leaning into having a bad performance here. Oscar Isaac, well, he's largely made up as this Apocalypse character. He doesn't look exactly human. I think he did a good job. He doesn't come across to me as Oscar Isaac. He comes across to me as this cartoon villain, so I say he did a good job. Rose Byrne as Moira McTaggart. Yeah, she did just as well of a job as she had in her previous installments in the X-Men franchise. Not good, not bad, passable. Sophie Turner, now there's another performance we get into here that I say it's just straight up rotten. And I've seen her in a lot of things, mostly Game of Thrones. I say she's just, to me, she's not a very good actress. Maybe she's good enough to keep getting work somehow, but no, she's completely bad in this. Her acting is just very bad. She actually brings this film down, in my opinion. Olivia Munn as Psylocke, she's not good or bad because her role isn't that strong in this. She's just like a villain type character who walks away at the end. She doesn't have like an emotional impact in her role in this, so I can't say she's good or bad acting. She's just kind of, she actually looks good in her outfit. But Olivia Munn is just kind of like one of those characters that she's there and she looks good in some of her roles and she has some sex appeal, but she doesn't make or break any movie that I've ever seen her in, so I'm just going to give her a pass. Largely, I would say it is actually Sophie Turner in her performance as Jean Grey that is the worst in this. But these actors and actresses aren't the actual thing that I consider that make this movie rotten. It's largely just the script and all the weird stuff that happens that has bad logic to it. And the number one fail, I'm going to say this before I go into any more audience reviews. I don't care if they mention it or not. I noticed that a lot of people aren't actually mentioning this when they talk about these X-Men movies, but I consider it their biggest flaw, and we see that flaw first appear here. This takes place 20 years, almost exactly 20 years after X-Men First Class, with this, with this iteration of these characters in this universe, so to speak, and they look the same age, or maybe they're 2 or 3 years older. That's a flaw. That's really a huge flaw because, there's almost nobody out there, even between certain times of their life, that looks the same when 20 years has gone by. No, it completely fails. Magneto looks the same. Dr. X looks the same. Rose Byrne, Moira McTaggart, she looks the same. 20 years have gone by. Jennifer Lawrence looks the same now. Some of these X-Men characters, they don't age like humans do, or they don't age at all, or they age in a non-specific way, so you can kind of hand wave that away. But you can't wave that away with Magneto because we saw him as an old man in the original X-Men series that took place in the very early 2000s, the year 2000 to be exact, and Magneto was an old man, retirement age, and yet in this film he's the same age he was in 1963, and I've seen enough footage from the Dark Phoenix movie. Dark Phoenix takes place 10 years after this film, and he's the same age there too. He looks like a 20 or 30 something character, and this movie X-Men Apocalypse is where you see this problem where characters just haven't aged, and in the next film Dark Phoenix it gets even worse. More time goes by and they still haven't aged. It's the biggest problem. It is the biggest logical problem here, and yet I don't see people bringing this up. I guess because it's X-Men and they just assume they can all remain young all the time. But no, even in the comics they age. Wolverine doesn't, but other characters do. So it's just not right, and that's just a big fail for me. And we're going to see how many other audience reviews bring this up. I'm guessing not a whole lot will. And that's unfortunate because it's a rather glaring flaw. 2 stars from 3 days ago. Sloggy writing, boring, and a complete drag. This is one of the worst of the X-Men films and a complete letdown after the previous success of the last film. Yeah, compared to First Class, this is compared to First Class, this is bad. Compared to Days of Future Past, this is completely disgustingly rotten because that film was outstandingly well done. Days of Future Past is probably the best one of this particular X-Men franchise, or this iteration of the X-Men. So yeah, compared to Days of Future Past, this is completely bad. And this came out right after Days of Future Past, so this franchise just took a straight drop off a cliff in one movie. I don't know why. Maybe somebody will mention why. I'm not going to read 5 and 4 star reviews because this is a contrarian episode, so I don't think we're going to get anything out of those. 3 star and below I'm going to read. We have a 3 star from December 20. How did a film like this manage to be boring? Apocalypse is reduced to a generic villain and the rest of the story is choppy and incoherent. I'm not going to recap the actual plot premise of this. Let's just say the villain is somebody that can enhance the powers of other mutants, and he's from ancient Egypt, from that time period, prehistory, and he returns, and he wants to take over the world. It should be exciting, but it does become largely boring, and I'd say about halfway in, it starts to become boring. And at the point we're at this big apocalyptic battle at the end of the movie, you feel like fast forwarding through it because it's boring. I mean, visually it's all there, but it's just boring. 3 stars. December 19, X-Men Apocalypse is not very good. It has a lot of awesome things in it, but other than that, it's meh. Yeah, well, let's get into my list because I like to write down my nitpicks, little plot fails, particularly. Right off the bat, I'll say that it failed visually for me because when this film shows things in ancient Egypt and when it even shows things in the modern setting of Egypt, for some reason it needs to put like this crazy yellow filter on everything. That's how it convinces us that we're in Egypt. I don't understand why, because if you just designed proper sets and you did well with the CGI, the artistry involved in that, you wouldn't have to put this strange yellow filter over everything to convince us we're in Egypt. And I thought the yellow filter was just done to cover up the bad CGI, and I think that's what was going on. The movie opens in ancient Egypt, and the CGI looks kind of very cartoonish and too clean, and there's this glaring yellow filter put over everything, and I think that yellow filter was just trying to like compensate for the bad CGI. It really stood out to me. And then when we went into the modern Egyptian setting, they just put the yellow filter there again because they had already used it to cover the bad CGI on the ancient Egyptian setting. And so, yeah, it was just, I had to make a note of it. It was off-putting. 3 stars, all around, not terrible, but not all that great. Yeah, that's not real specific there, but no, not 3 stars, 2 stars max. And for example, not only do we have the aging problem, but Javier, Charles Xavier, I guess, if you want to get nitpicky about the way to pronounce his name, there's a scene in which he actually brings up and makes fun of the fact that nobody's actually aged in 20 years. And he does this in which in one scene he says that Myra McTaggart, she is barely aged a day, and he's kind of in love with her. And the CIA agent character played by Rose Byrne, he was in love with her in the other, X-Men First Class. He first met her and fell in love with her, and he wiped her memory out. Well, when he sees her again in this, in her CIA office, he has to make a comment that, wow, he's amazed that she hasn't aged a day. She has barely aged a day. And the way the movie does this, it's kind of hand waving away the fact that everybody in this film, nobody has aged hardly a day, and that's just the movie's or the director's way of kind of bringing up the criticism and then dismissing it out of hand. It doesn't work for me. It just highlights the fact that the director couldn't explain why everybody looked to be the same age. There was no attempt even in changing their hairstyle or makeup or lighting to try to make them look older. They didn't even bother. I mean, yes, Magneto's character, Michael Fassbender, had more of a slight beard on him, but they didn't do anything else to try to suggest he had aged. Nothing at all, and that was a complete fail. 2.5 stars, November 9. This movie was all right. I think it could have been better. There was some parts I really liked, but other than that, this was pretty disappointing. I'm going to give this movie a C+, okay? 3 stars, November 3rd. Many characters have their setup story, which to me feels like eating okay tapas than a real good steak. The surprise and funny sequences in the movie, which doesn't mean much to the plot, is more exciting than the plot itself. Maybe they mean, there are some sequences, some action sequences where some kind of odd things happen, and maybe that was something novel. But yeah, there was nothing here. It was just cookie cutter villain, bad guy wants to take over the world. And we've seen all this before. And the movie failed in the ending where, one character, Jean Grey, she kind of releases her Dark Phoenix persona and uses this energy to defeat the bad guy at the end, kind of almost breaking the next film where this is revealed. And it's very cliched that she's like, somehow making a sacrifice to defeat the bad guy. and it's very formulaic and boring and nothing suspenseful or tension filled about it. Bad guy is defeated, and there's a main flaw with this character wise involving Magneto. Magneto goes along with Apocalypse's plan, and the plan is to kill billions of people on Earth, and Magneto does his best to do this, to kill these billions of people, and then later, after Apocalypse is defeated, Magneto he comes back to being one of the good guys, and he decides everything's fine now, and everybody else in the X-Men decide he's fine now, he's one of us again. Well, it doesn't work like that. You can't have a character just decide that it's okay to kill billions of people, and then, a few hours later, he's just back on your team again, everything's going to be fine. Doesn't work like that, and this movie thinks that everything does work like that, and there's multiple characters it has doing things, and then all of a sudden it's all okay at the end because Apocalypse was defeated, everybody can just go back to being friends again. No, completely stupid. Let's move on. Half a star, October 11, 2019. First off, Apocalypse is 6'7". His voice is much deeper and angrier. This character was shorter than most females and had a soft, poetic tone to his voice, yawn, and his storyline along with his horsemen were just not accurate at all. Leave it to Fox Studios to ruin a franchise. So that's somebody that's a fan of the comic saying that the movie did it all wrong. I'll take their word for it. Continuing, here's a hint. The people going to see these comic book movies are 100,000% comic book buffs. So if you want revenue and better results, stick to the original content because fans will ruin your investment. Yeah, that's just comic book fans. They are what they are. They expect, somebody like Bryan Singer to be faithful to what the comic books show of these characters. And when they don't get that, they're going to really punish you for that. They're not going to purchase your merchandise. They're not going to repeat view your films. You really should probably, as a producer and director, try to appease these people and then appease the general audience. But what do I know, right? Half a star, September 26, 2019. Almost the worst entry in the franchise. Didn't take any of the characters seriously. The story was lame, and worst of all, it felt cheap, unforgivable. Yeah, I'll say some stuff is obviously cheap, like the CGI effect used on Mystique, Jennifer Lawrence's character. At times, you can tell she's just in a lycra or latex suit, and it looks like one. It's very cheap, and at times the CGI on her face is just to make it blue. And to make her eyes yellow, it's just really cheap and almost looks like a cartoon character in some scenes, and that's the same way with the Beast. He looks straight up like a cartoon character's face was painted onto his because the CGI was so cheap or rushed or whatever the excuse is going to be, but it felt very cheap. And there were a lot of effects. A lot of money was put into the effects of the final apocalyptic battle, but the simple stuff, making the characters look real. The blue characters, you had a lot of blue characters in this film. You had straight up three blue characters, and they all looked cartoonishly bad and blue, and the blue was cartoonishly blue tone that came across, and it was too much, in my opinion, too much blue. Why did they put three blue characters together? It was like you're watching the Smurf berries, the Smurf characters in this thing. Very cheap. It made it look cheap, and the CGI of the actual ancient Egyptian setting looked very cheap right off the bat from the opening sequence in the movie. But let's move on. 1 star, September 7, 2019. This movie is so atrocious, a total bastardization of the source material, and 100% should not have been able to have been produced. I can't speak to the source material. I'll take the comic book boys fans. I'll take their word seriously, though. A lot of people in real life have told me that they were, they considered this movie to be no good because this wasn't the apocalypse story from the comics, so I'll take the word for it. September 5, 1 star, absolute pile of trash. They managed to make Apocalypse so boring of a villain, and they tried to rush in so many X-Men characters without giving them time to develop or become something. Boy, I feel bad for the way they ruined Sophie Turner's role by making a Jean Grey Grey, who had to display about the same level of emotions as Sansa Stark. Yeah, but that's Sophie Turner, really, because, people tell me the same thing about Dark Phoenix, that she was really bad in that. Her acting is really bad. And I've watched all of Game of Thrones, well, everything except some episodes of the final season, and she didn't have to do a lot in Game of Thrones. It worked for her in Game of Thrones. It doesn't work for her in X-Men movies, and we'll see if she has any kind of career beyond this. But it's just straight up. I haven't met anybody that says her acting is good in the X-Men films at all. You got some 4 stars. I'm not going to read those. 3 stars, August 29. Despite its messy timeline errors and some plot inconveniences, this had the potential of being a good movie. Well, talk about timeline errors. This movie, like others before it, just simply retcons Wolverine once again, and retcons his story and retcons Colonel Stryker once again. It's like they just can't, Fox Studios, they just can't figure out, they never could figure out how to stick to one particular type of Wolverine origin story, how to stick to the timeline, how to stick to one version of Colonel Stryker. 3 different versions I've seen of Wolverine's origins, 3 different versions of Colonel Stryker. None of them have much to do with any of the others, except they all have that same fortress dam thing where Colonel Stryker is inside the dam in the mountains. That's about the only thing that they've kept between all the different versions of this. I'll say that's another flaw in this film too, because this film, I don't see any of the rest of this film taking place in a winter type environment, but actually in part of this movie that takes place inside that dam fortress that Colonel Stryker has. It's shown when Wolverine escapes from the dam that when he opens the door, it's like a blizzard outside and it's wintertime or something. And I don't know if they're trying to say it's really high up in the mountains where it would be blizzard conditions outside, but the other movies don't show this, and it wasn't winter in any other scenes in the movie. So I'm going to say that was a straight up fail, some kind of plot hole, incongruity in the script. There was a blizzard outside when Wolverine escaped, and I've seen 3 different versions of him escaping that dam, by the way, and Fox Studios just can't seem to make up their minds how it happens. 4 stars, I'm not going to read it. I'm going to continue on. 3 stars, August 11, 2019, the beginning, top. The first hour, great. The next hour, okay, but average action stuff. The last hour, just too fucking long, and action scenes that take forever without adding anything to the movie, except a feeling of, when will this finally end? Yeah, the final battle scene, it was really just long and drawn out. I got bored. I did appreciate the creativeness on how Quicksilver saves everyone inside the mansion. That was really well done. The soundtrack fit with the time period. That was pretty damn good. But a lot of the rest of the stuff was just completely boring. 2 stars, July 26, 2019. I just don't know how you can get so many things wrong. The timeline doesn't make any sense now. It doesn't bring anything new to the table. The best scenes are the ones with Quicksilver. Yeah, Quicksilver saving the people from the mansion, that's fantastic. If the rest of the movie had been like that, wow, it would have been incredible, but unfortunately, it wasn't. 3 stars, July 26. The movie feels broken at its core at times. We are expected to care about Magneto's family before they get killed, in one of those most ridiculous death scenes ever. The story feels very loose. It never feels like the story is going anywhere, but even so, this movie nails the characters except Mystique, which are the saving grace of the movie. It's a shame we won't see them anymore after Dark Phoenix. Well, yeah, thanks for bringing up another thing that was in my notes. We see a Magneto that has a family in Poland, and it's just a cardboard family. We don't know hardly anything about them. And some police come, somebody at work turns in Magneto as being a Magneto, and the police show up, and the police pretty much are sure he's Magneto, so they come along with bows and arrows as weapons, and some of them have sticks and clubs for weapons. It looks like they actually have tree branches of weapons for weapons, some of them, because they don't want to have metal. They've removed the badges from their uniforms, for example, and they confront Magneto in the woods for some reason. And two of the police officers, they have bow and arrows. Now, I found it completely implausible that the Polish police officers just happen to have bows and arrows at the ready at the police station, and they know how to use them in a in a manner that they could use them as police officers. And they actually kill Magneto's wife and child, and we're supposed to feel sorry for him and how he kind of turns to the dark side because they've killed his wife and child. But it doesn't work at all because we don't give a crap about his wife and child. And it also doesn't work because I'm supposed to believe that police officers in a modern police force just happen to have these bows and arrows. They're not exactly long bows, but they're bow and arrows like something you would buy at Walmart to go target practice with. And they just happen to have those and are confident enough to use those as weapons on, a police raid. Come on, it's not impossible, but I say highly improbable, and it just takes me out of the believability. 2.5 stars, July 4, 2019. X-Men inconsistently good. Not here though. Yeah, it's just sad that you have Fox Studios, you have Bryan Singer, you have some, you have the X-Men movie that came before this, Days of Future Past. It was a slam dunk. It was awesome. I could see it more than once, and then all of a sudden it drops to this garbage, and then from what I've heard, drops even further with a thud in Dark Phoenix. It is very sad. 3 stars, June 25, 2019. The overabundance of and reliance on sparkly CGI, along with limited character development and the drawn-out and overwrought city-busting finale, are examples of how this X-Men film favors noise over nuance. There are still moments of merit. A scene with Magneto's family is both dark and heart-wrenching. No, it's not. And once again, Quicksilver steals the show in a single bound. Yes, he does. But Apocalypse's plan to conquer the world has a been there, done that feel about it. With better writing, he could have been on that. Yeah, it's like stuff we've seen all before. Bad guy wants to take over the world. Big whoop-de-doo. I'll say something. There is quite a problem with Quicksilver too, like plot-wise, it's improbable. And he almost makes fun of his own role in the movie when he states at one point in the film that he has been living in his mom's basement for the last decade. Yeah, he has been. That's what the film shows. And then he comes out of his mom's basement literally to join our cast of characters to have this battle with Apocalypse. But he even makes fun of it in his own dialogue that he's been living in his mom's basement for 10 years. And, while that's not impossible, it's highly improbable. It's also highly implausible that he would also be the same age he was 20 years ago or even 10 years ago. In fact, it's 10 years ago, set in 1973, that we're introduced to Quicksilver. And he's been in his mom's basement the whole time, and he looks the same with the same haircut, and his mom is the same age too. Still serving him lunch in the basement, but now he's playing Pac-Man or Miss Pac-Man in the basement. Kind of stupid, really stupid, and a lot of the movie, it has that same kind of logic to it. 0.5 star, June 24, 2019. This movie failed on every level. It is boring and cliche and added nothing to the franchise. This was a giant waste of time, money, and opportunity. I don't see how this isn't the worst reviewed film in the franchise. Awful. Yeah, it should be the worst. It's neck and neck with X-Men or Dark Phoenix. No X-Men title on it, just Dark Phoenix. It might also be up there on, fan rottenness when we talk about the previous franchise, the previous iteration called X-Men The Last Stand, where all these characters were played by others. It's neck and neck for that too. I hear people discussing which is worse, X-Men The Last Stand or this one. The jury's out, and when I finally get around to watching Dark Phoenix, I'm going to find out if this one is still the worst or if this one might be better. It's hard to tell. As far as Rotten Tomatoes is concerned, this one's not even rotten, so take that for what it's worth. 2 stars. In what seems to be a running trend in the series, Apocalypse has a fantastic cold open introductory credit sequence too, followed by a lot of mediocrity, occasionally sprinkled with quality. It's also the king of logical nitpicks amongst the 11 films' already messy continuity, a matter not helped by the tame course its narrative takes as an aspiring reboot that ultimately fails with its new young cast. Though Michael Fassbender's Magneto and Evan Peters' Quicksilver steal the show again, yeah, it's like, how many times can they mess up the continuity? They've done it with this, they did it again in Dark Phoenix. It's like I've seen so many, just the Wolverine origin stuff has been messed up so much. And I'm sure they've messed up a lot more than that. They've definitely messed up Jean Grey 2 or 3 times as well. Again, I'll say nobody's yet brought up the fact that nobody ages between these films when 20 years is going by. We still haven't found any of that. 3 stars, June 16. Fans have been waiting for Apocalypse to finally make his big screen debut and are left severely disappointed. All the concepts are there for a great film, but something about an ancient villain with unlimited powers ultimately breaks the suspension of disbelief. Yeah, well, in this, he's not shown to have unlimited powers, but he's shown that he could kind of amplify and use everybody else's powers. But, in the comics, I think he is supposed to have unlimited powers, but in the film, he's just defeated by Jean Grey when she pops out her Dark Phoenix persona. Which retcons and ruins her again. 3 stars, June 16, 2019. The new generation of X-Men returns to face their most powerful enemy, which is Apocalypse, and they will have to join forces to destroy it. In this new installment, we see fundamental characters of the X-Men who had not yet left in the new generations, others who had left very little in the previous films, and what must be highlighted is the brief appearance of Arma X, Weapon X, which is undoubtedly one of the best things in the movie. I think this is the best film that has been made of the X-Men to date. Wow, they're really seeing a whole lot in this, aren't they? I will agree on one thing. You actually see Hugh Jackman play his role as Wolverine or as Weapon X, but he doesn't do a lot. He's just used to make one part of the plot work, and then he runs out the door and kind of retcons himself again for the 3rd time. It's too bad they had Hugh Jackman show up as Wolverine, but he did very little. It was kind of wasted, in my opinion. 2.5 stars, June 12, 2019. Though I do really enjoy how the recent X-Men movies have developed the Magneto character, and I really like that at the beginning of the movie as well. Overall, I can't stand a superhero movie with an unbeatable villain that is underdeveloped and is somehow beaten at the end due to plot cliches. Yeah, Apocalypse was supposed to be so fantastically powerful, but he was beaten in a very boring and cliched way at the end. And Magneto just decided to become one of the good guys just because he just had a change of heart, and everything was okay after that. Let's take a look at my list here. What else do I have before I forget? Let's see. Yes. There's a scene in which the characters... Jean Grey and a couple of other characters, they're coming out of a showing of Return of the Jedi at the theater. This is to kind of set the movie in 1983. And when they come out of the theater, they kind of make comments about what they thought of Return of the Jedi. And I think it's Jean Grey that actually remarks that, well, at least she now knows that the 3rd movie out of every series or trilogy is the worst one, and you can tell that they're making fun of this very film. It's like the director or producer making fun of this actual movie, knowing that this would be the worst one of the franchise. And yeah, that's exactly what this is. I mean, this was made before Dark Phoenix, so you can see exactly what they were trying to do, and it's so damn obvious when they come out of that theater that they're telling the audience this is the worst one, the 3rd one, and that's what they're also saying about Return of the Jedi. What else is on my list here? Jennifer Lawrence's cheap blue suit. Yep, mentioned that. Yeah, Stryker. Colonel Stryker captures the mutants, takes them to his base in the dam, and he doesn't bother to actually ask questions that would have helped him at all. He just asks a superficial question about I think it was where he can find Apocalypse, or where he can find Magneto, or something to that effect. And they actually tell him at one point that Apocalypse, or this big threat, is here, and he needs to worry about that. And he never asks any questions about that. He just straight up ignores it because the plot needs him to. And that's it. It completely took me out of believability, because Colonel Stryker, he would want to know information about what's going on, but he just doesn't want to know. He just turns around and walks away after he's captured them. He doesn't need to know anything about what's going on. So I had to make a note of that. I made a note about the fact that it's winter only around Stryker's base, nowhere else. Yeah, Quicksilver was in his mom's basement for 10 years. The end battle is too drawn out. Yeah, everybody ends as friends except for Psylocke. Psylocke's character, for whatever reason, she's not killed. She just knows that she has been defeated, and Apocalypse has been defeated. The other characters who went along with Apocalypse's plan suddenly just joined the good guys, like Storm, and they're all is forgiven, I guess, with them for what they tried to do. But Psylocke, for some weird reason, she just gives an angry look when she knows that she's been defeated, and then she just kind of runs off and is never seen again. And I don't know what the point of that was. How come she didn't join up with Storm and the others and just become one of the good guys? I don't know. It's completely weird, though. She just went off in a huff, and that was it. They should have had her killed off. I don't know why she had to live just to, run off in a huff. Anyway, I made a note of it because it didn't really make sense to me. And so here we have X-Men Apocalypse. 47% on the tomato meter. I think that's fair. 65% on the audience score. I don't think that's right. I think this should, I don't know who gave this high marks. Maybe there was a campaign to do so at one point, or maybe people saw Dark Phoenix and they just rated this one higher to try to even the score. We have fans of comics that do this kind of weird stuff. They'll think a movie's unfairly rated one way or the other based on another film they've seen, and so they'll come on to Rotten Tomatoes many years after the fact, and they'll try to upvote and downvote certain movies to try to make things conform to their worldview of the franchise. And it's kind of weird, but that's the way these fans are. So I think that has something to do with the fact that this has such a high audience score, because I think a fair audience score would be about 45%. That feels right to me, and I'm sure that feels more right to actual X-Men comic fans. 45% is what I think is fair on this. Watch this if you have absolutely nothing better to do. But in my advice, my opinion is you should just watch another showing of X-Men Days of Future Past and call that the end of this iteration of the X-Men, and that way you're never disappointed. And I will see you again on the next episode of Rotten Reviews.